This presentation on the Water Prevention and Control of Pollution Act of 1974, or simply put, the Water Act, is meant to give a brief overview over its various provisions. Why is this relevant? Is because India's situation with respect to the quality of its water sources is pretty bad. According to a water quality index that was published by WaterAid and was also quoted by Niti Aayog in its Composite Water Management Index, 70% of our water sources are contaminated. India ranks 120 among 122 countries that were a part of this index. The major contributors to water pollution in India are agricultural activities through the use of harmful chemicals and fertilizers which seep into the soil and leach into the groundwater, and the release of trade effluents that have not been treated into water bodies. Household activities also contribute to water pollution, but not in a scale as grand as the first two. A brief background into how the Water Act came to be passed would require us to look at the 7th schedule of the Constitution of India. In the 7th schedule, which lays down the subjects over which the union or the state will exercise their powers on, water is primarily a state subject at entry number 17. The centre can only legislate over interstate rivers and river valleys that by parliament are designated as expedient, requiring the centre's oversight. The Water Pollution Act was passed by the centre by exercising certain special powers under Article 252, Subclause 1. This allows the centre to legislate on a state subject with the consent of two states, which have been obtained by passing resolutions in the respective legislatures of the state. The Act was initially made applicable only to 12 states, but eventually all other states have come to adopt it. The scope of the Act is to create a legal framework that aims to enforce certain actions in an effort to check and regulate pollution of water. The Act defines pollution under Section 2, Subclause E as pollution is essentially the contamination or alteration of water and its various characteristics through the direct or indirect release of solid, liquid, or gaseous effluents or pollutants, which can cause nuisance or affect the quality and quantity of water, rendering it difficult to use for household uses, commercial uses, industrial uses, or which renders it unhealthy for plants, animals, or aquatic organisms. The applicability of this act is specifically with respect to effluents, which are of two types and have been distinguished. Trade effluent, which is essentially water, sewage, or wastewater which is released by any activity that is related to a trade. This does not include domestic sewage. And sewage effluents, which refer to all wastewater fecal releases from both domestic as well as industrial spheres. The Act is applicable upon individual persons and households on one hand, and occupiers of premises where any activity that releases effluents is carried out, be it manufacturing or otherwise. It also covers government departments and companies which can be held responsible for offences under the Act. Therefore, it can be said that the ambit of applicability of this Act is pretty wide. It places liabilities upon the aforementioned parties for not fulfilling their responsibilities under this Act. Broadly, the framework created under the Act can be categorized into three types. One is an institutional framework, which creates bodies to administer and enforce the various provisions of this Act. Then you have preventive measures, which lay down certain standards of behavior that must be adhered to by individuals as well as entities. And thirdly, punitive provisions, which fix liability upon the aforementioned individuals and entities for not adhering to the behavioral standards set out. The institutional framework under this Act is pretty straightforward. It consists of a central authority, which is the Central Pollution Control Board, and 29 state pollution control boards. After an amendment was passed to the Water Act, all directions passed by the Central Pollution Control Board have become applicable upon the State Pollution Control Board. The Act also creates central and state level water laboratories for testing and analysis of the samples that have been collected from streams in order to ensure they adhere to the various levels that have been stipulated. The Central Pollution Control Board performs a wide array of functions and it's empowered to create a plan for resolving pollution throughout the country. It also plays an advisory role in advising the central government on how pollution can be combated. It sets standards of quality for water, air, and noise levels. And it also passes directions to state pollution control boards for how these boards may control air, water, and noise pollutions in their jurisdictions. The state pollution control boards are not merely subordinate to the CPCB, they also play a role in administering enforcement of this act in the territories that they are responsible for. Primarily, they are the issuing authority for consent to industries to operate or to establish in their territory. They also identify various zones in the state based on the levels of water or air quality in that area and designate them into red, orange, or green areas requiring different levels of permission. It also conducts inspection and investigation and sets standards for emissions, sewage, and levels of wells in the state. Now, let's look at certain key provisions under this Act. Firstly, the institutional provisions under this Act which are relevant are actually the ones that the State Pollution Control Board is empowered to perform. Now, the SPCB can authorize its agents or representatives through a direction to collect samples from streams or water bodies near a premises to test the levels of the contaminants in it. However, one thing is absolutely necessary to be noted here. This testing must follow a very specific procedure. There is a strict requirement that this procedure be adhered to. Otherwise, the samples that have been collected would not be admissible as evidence in courts. And there is a case law for this. We'll look at that towards the end. Authorized agents and representatives directed by the state pollution control boards can further conduct search and seizures in the premises where it suspects there is a reason to attract penalty. The search and seizures have also got to be in strict adherence with the Criminal Procedural Code. Now, preventive provisions, as we discussed earlier, are standards of behavior that must be adhered to by entities. So, firstly, it is that no entity or an individual must discharge any effluent into a stream or construct obstacles or dump material into it with a view to prevent any activity that can lower the quality of the stream. However, there are certain exceptions to this. A person or an occupier who has the right to build any passage or any sort of an embankment on the river can on the stream can do so. If before the activity that is not permitted, this person has managed to take the consent of the state board, then with the consent they're allowed to perform some of these activities. If the material is not as such polluting in nature, that can be released into the stream if it is not something that will lower the quality of the stream. And if there are certain deposits that have been naturally deposited by the stream on the banks and these deposits are returned into the stream, it is not essentially an act of pollution and it's not prohibited under this section. It is to be noted here that the term stream has been given a wide scope under the Act. It includes inland inlets of water from the sea, rivers, and underground water bodies, even, etc. Consent to establish and operate are mandatory for new industrial units. And Section 25 basically lays down that if an industrial activity is meant to be carried out, consent to establish is necessary before it begins. Then there is consent to operate if there is a new or an altered outlet that releases sewage. And thirdly, if a new type of effluent or sewage is being released for which there already is not a consent that has been obtained. Punitive provisions. Now, punitive provisions essentially exist to give teeth to the enforcement and administrative mechanism so that compliance to the provisions is not seen as an option but seen as a necessity. Now, because of the high penalty for non compliance under some of these sections, industries tend to look at operating without necessary permissions as a high risk activity. So, under section 41, there are different standards of punishment depending upon the nature of the direction that was not adhered to. And section 44 essentially states that if an entity is found to be operating without a consent to establish or a consent to operate that is valid, then it can prescribe imprisonment, the court can prescribe imprisonment for a period between 1.5 to 6 years with fine, which is a pretty wide range. So, now that we've seen some of the important provisions from the Act, it's important to look at case laws because they help us understand how the Act is enforced and how courts essentially treat the various subjects in it. So, the first case law we'll be looking at is one of the Delhi Bottling Company Private Limited versus the Central Pollution Control Board. So, the Central Pollution Control Board had collected certain samples of water from a stream near Delhi Bottling Company Private Limited. And upon analysis, it found that these samples did not conform to the standards it had prescribed. It subsequently filed a suit relying upon the analysis that had been conducted. However, this suit failed because the board did not adhere to the proper procedural requirements that is required under the law. So the samples were essentially treated as inadmissible due to the non adherence to the procedural standards for collecting the samples. The next case law that's extremely important is filed by a very famous environmental litigant, that is MC Mehta. He has filed a wide range of public interest litigations with the sole aim of protecting the environment. Now, this particular case is also called the Kanpur Tanneries case. So, a cluster of tanneries operating on the banks of river Ganga were releasing untreated sewage into the water. The State Pollution Control Board did not take notice of this fact, so the court adjudged that the State Pollution Control Board has to exercise its monitoring powers and put its mechanisms in place to take note of offending entities. But the most important observation made under this judgment was that the financial capacity or the status of finances do not qualify as a ground for avoiding installation of sewage treatment plants before releasing effluents into a water body. And the final case we'll be looking into is one that was in Karnataka, and it's between a granite company and Karnataka State Pollution Control Board. So this particular granites unit was located in the catchment area of the Tippagondanahalli Reservoir. And the several parts of this unit were located in areas that had been designated as orange zones. Further, the granite unit was operating without a consent to establish from the State Pollution Control Board. Upon finding this fact, the State Pollution Control Board ordered closure of the unit. Now, this granite units appealed, claiming that number one, it had state of the art water treatment facilities and therefore it was not releasing untreated sewage into the reservoir. And secondly, it also appealed, stating that the State Pollution Control Board did not give it the right to be heard or the opportunity to present its case. Now, the National Green Tribunal held that the unit was not entitled to be heard before the order of closure was passed. This is primarily because the granites unit showed an extreme disregard for all requirements under law and it did not comply to any of the requirements, not just of failure to obtain a consent to establish, but also that it did not take note that it was not allowed to conduct these activities of releasing effluents into a reservoir which supplies drinking water. The right of people to clean drinking water from the reservoir was upheld to be paramount in this case. And that pretty much sums up the essential provisions under the Act and a few relevant case laws. This is definitely not all of it, and if you're interested in the subject, you should read more, especially more of cases filed by MC Mehta. I find those especially interesting. Thank you so much for your time. I hope you gained something from this exercise.